So we get that. We're into gymnasium floor, what everyone's been waiting for.
Jay, you want me to just say a quick word about this? I think that
Sure.
this report. So reminding everybody, in I think it was 2018, the EFPBC hired a consultant to go in and take a look at the gym floor and also a reconfiguration of the gymnasium. Our athletic director, Mark Aria, is with us. So hi, Mark. Mark or Chris Blesson in a minute can speak to kind of the configuration shortcomings in that space, but we've known for some time that we have them, and that's limiting our use of the space pretty significantly. So the report in 2018 took a comprehensive look. There were some preliminary cost estimates, and then COVID happened. The floor, what's really driving this, I think it's fair to say, Mark, is the condition of the floor is really poor. I think, Jay, back in 2015, the floor did come up as scope for the high school. The committee felt at the time we could not really justify including it. 8 years ago, the floor wasn't in need of replacement. It just seemed like it would in a few years. And now that those years have gone by, it does need to be replaced. So the school committee actually stepped up with Frank's leadership and came up with some funding. So over the summer, TAP-A Architects, under the leadership of Chris Blesson, who's also with us, went back, looked at the gym, met with Mark, looked at the reconfiguration options, looked at the floor, confirmed underneath the existing resilient floor is another resilient floor that's totally worn out. So I think Jay shared with the committee back in August, and maybe again more recently, that what TAP-A came up with was a couple of options for the gym. We have two flooring options, either you tear up the resilient floor, you put resilient back down like a rubber floor, or you do wood. And then in terms of a reconfiguration of the space, literally turning the room 90 degrees, there were a couple of options. One was to divide the room into thirds, and the other was to split the room in half, and then the option within those halves to actually split them as well in half again, sort of a half-quarter arrangement, if you will. So given that there's differences in cost between the resilient floor and the wood, and there's differences in cost between the kind of 1/3 reconfiguration and the half-quarter, TAP-A and the cost estimator, that was Peter Bradley, I think, Chris, is that right? I think it was. Yeah. So Peter was the cost estimator of record for the Lynch project as well. So back in August, they said project cost would be anywhere between 2.15 to I think $2.43 million, with maybe 6 months of escalation that would carry us into like summer for the spring or summer for the bid. So that's kind of where it was left, and with the expectation that we would hear from administration what the preference was for both the flooring approach and also for the how to actually reconfigure the space before we could really be confident to say what that number was going to look like. So that's sort of the backstory, I guess. And Jay, if it's okay, if maybe Chris or Mark or Frank would sort of lead this off, as they've picked it up again and had more conversation. I think are in a position to present recommendations tonight.
Of course.
Any way you'd like us to do it, Mr. Chair. I'm just wondering whether or not you want to have Chris go through just kind of what the options were briefly, high level, then Mark can kind of step in with his expertise, and then I'm happy to, as I often do in my role, come in and do any kind of cleanup that might be needed. And I anticipate not with these two gentlemen. So,
Chris, do you want to jump in?
Yes, someone just turned the lights off. Thank you. They just turned them back on. Okay, so, it just went dark over here.
I spoke too soon. I think. Should I do the cleanup now?
Yeah, you can run cleanup while I get the lights on. No, but they're on now, and I will show you the floor plans. I did do a little slideshow here, so let me just share. So I assume you all can see that screen?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So our process was really that we met with, and Chris already kind of laid this out, so I won't belabor the point, but we met with the athletic director and also reviewed those previous reports and engineering data. and we looked at a few options which PMC did analyze, and then went back and confirmed that the one we landed on was this sort of quadrant approach, which Chris talked about. And what's a little harder to see kind of in this diagram, but is that there's two main court options that are sort of like this, and you can run the bleachers out to them and have, you can have two courts running with one-sided bleachers, or the idea would be that the second set of bleachers could actually travel out and extend so that you could get a full court with full two-sided loaded spectators on either side. And I think as the design evolves, we can pick which court on the right or left is the one. And that'll be determined by a couple of factors. One is that there's windows along the right edge. And so we want to make sure that the capacity for bleachers hits those, but doesn't overextend above them. And so that's kind of the layout. The other version of that layout is a 3-court option, which I can show, but it basically centered the court on the middle, and then had two sort of side courts over here, one on each side. And that was the original kind of conversation that we had with Mark on site. But then when I was sort of analyzing the space layouts and looking at a previous drawing that was included back as an alternate for the construction that happened at the high school through Sims Manny, they also had a 4-court layout and a center court option. And so this really gets you, I think, the most programmatic benefit is to do what we showed on the underlay here, which is the quadrant that can also have 2 main courts. The other thing you'll note in this drawing is the running track around the perimeter. It's not a sort of regulation indoor track or anything like that, but it does give the ability to run track and really, and again, when we get into final design, we would program and design out the sort of final turning radiuses and see if we can get that to work around the edge of the court. So then you can have truly 4 stations with running on the perimeter and get everything to work in a nice cohesive package. And then the other sort of big thing here was that floor conversation, and it goes to the idea that, do we do a resilient floor? Do we do a wood? And I think long term, the wood is a better court, both for, and I'll let Mark talk about some of those reasons, but I think ultimately the wood is kind of the better solution. And so we presented that, and you'll have to raise up the floor system, and that's kind of depicted up in the corner here. And then create transitions at the doors to come back down to the concrete level that's there right now. So that's kind of the high level. And then the only other thing here to note is just that budget, which I had on another slide, but Chris said it verbally, so it's not super critical. Sorry, but it's that slide there. And I think that really is kind of it, is that this price includes all of the stuff that's required for wood floor, new capacity. The capacity target also for the bleachers was so that you can host an actual MIAA tournament. And so that was our target. That was the conversation. And so this budget right here, we feel like is a comfortable budget to get you sort of all the things that are needed for the gym right now. And with that, I'll stop sharing and let Mark talk about some of the need and benefits of this.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. So I'll start off with just the first thing, the floor. Currently, and no matter what we do with the floor, just to go back to the regulation size track, no matter what we do in the gym or what layout we go with, we cannot fit a regulation size indoor track in the gymnasium. It's just the size of it doesn't allow for it. So, but we do have practice lines right now, and whatever layout we go with, we'd still have those lines for practice for our indoor track teams. In terms of the surface, the surface of the floor, I mean, we'd prefer wood. I think if you asked any kid in the building, they'd prefer wood. It's just better on your joints, and it's just a safer surface for us student athletes. Essentially, they're playing on a rolled out foam pad that's on top of concrete right now. So it's very little give at all. So the wear and tear on your body when you're playing on that or having PE class on that day in and day out is not the best surface. In terms of maintenance, and Chris Conway can probably speak to this as well. Something happens with the wood floor, you can sand it down, you can refinish it. If you tear up your rubber floor, you have to get a whole new rubber floor. You can't replace, you can't repair. It's very difficult. So now you're talking a whole new rubber floor. So that's in terms of the flooring. Setup wise, we prefer the 4 quadrants with, if we stayed with a similar layout to we have now, or the 3 courts going across, we'd still have issues with seating capacity. So currently we don't have enough seating currently to host even a first round tournament game, which requires you to have seating for at least 500 people for a state tournament game. So for instance, for this year, if our boys and girls are going to host the first round game, we have to find an alternative site to go to host the game, or we have to go to the team that we're going to play. So even though we have the privilege of hosting, we'd have to give that up because of the seating arrangement. I shouldn't say the size of our gym, because of the seating arrangement and the configuration of our gym. If we went with the 4 quadrant, not only could we host multiple games at once, which would be fantastic, we could host 4 practices at once as well. So it would increase gym time for our student athletes. It would increase gym time for our youth programs as well. It maybe even be able to get our youth programs in earlier with the additional court. Right now we have 1 official size volleyball court and basketball court in our gym, and we'd be taking that to, we'd go from 1 to 4, which is again just a huge benefit for not only athletics but for PE as well, because now our phys ed teachers can split the gym in quadrants as well as in half. With the 4 quadrant, or the splitting the gym in half, or with the ability to drive the bleacher over to host a really big tournament game, it would also give us the ability to host neutral site semifinals for state tournaments as well. So the school would have the ability to host larger games for the MIA and increase revenue for our school and our teams as well. So we obviously like that setup for a number of reasons. We feel like we want to do it right this time. And again, going back to student safety, going back to what's best for our student athletes and for our community, I think this is the way to go.
Thank you, Mike. Open up for any questions.
Can I just add, Jay, that TAPA's drawing, their notes, and Peter's estimate also included literally moving things off the wall to the opposite wall for that whole reconfiguration. So like scoreboards we're moving. I think maybe we own 1 new scoreboard, but it's a pretty comprehensive look at everything that would be impacted by the reconfiguration of the space.
I just have a quick question. I'm all for it. My question is, with the wooden floor, now I'm talking about accessibility only because I hear from people who use that to vote. And I know the current floor now that's there is not good, but I'm wondering, over the long term, is the wood floor going to be viable enough, say, for somebody with a disability? Because I know the current floor, if somebody walks there with a cane or even with a wheelchair, I've heard it skids in that. Do we know if it's any better as far as not being so slippery for people that may have mobility problems, that may have to come in to use the gym or something? I'm just curious. I don't know so that's why I'm asking.
So the thing I would say is it's a lot easier to clean and to maintain a wooden floor. So the likelihood of there being slick spots would be less. There's also more visible. Slick spots are more visible on a wooden floor than they would be on the rubber floor. And also go back to anything on wheels. It's easier to move on the wooden floor than it is to move on the rubber floor. Especially, that's the reason why we're in the predicament we're in with our bleachers not working, is because if you're, say you're sitting in a chair with wheels, or anything, it kind of gets into the rubber and it's very difficult to move. So I think it would be, the same, if not better, accessibility wise, wood with the rubber rather than the rubber.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Richard, you had a question?
And yeah, just to follow up on Lisa's question about the town elections, and then just wondering, does the either the design impact the use of the gymnasium for all the town elections? Has that been considered?
I wouldn't anticipate it affects town election, although we didn't talk specifically about the layout for town election.
Right.
I think we can have that conversation just to double check, and maybe the provisions we make is adding a couple of outlets and a couple strategic spots to limit, extension cords that you might have to run out or something like that. But, I don't think we would be talking about adding floor boxes or anything like that. And I don't anticipate trouble with accessibilities. Just to further Mark's point is, let's say over the last 15 years, I can think of 2 schools that TAPE's put rubber or resilient floors in the athletic in the gym, and the rest of them are all wood, and they're almost all used for the same voting purposes and things. And I can't recall a single callback on anything to do with accessibilities on the gym floors for these wood floors. So I don't anticipate that it would be a problem for voting long. Yeah.
And just so I'm clear, the current floor dates back to the original building. Is that?
No, so I believe it's 2010.
I think it's older than that because it was at its
think it was
10-year life when we did the school. It was past its 10-year life. So
Oh,
Yeah, I
it's
think
got
it was
5
my
closer
next-
to 2002, 2003.
2003, okay.
So it's well past its useful life.
Right.
Thanks.
All right, Geetha and then Mark.
Yeah, I just have a question, Chris, with the from TAPE, the cost estimate you had, and with the other scenarios happening on the other floors. Was there any need that you felt like you had to open up the gym floor to see what's under the subfloor or subgrade to get a good handle on what needs to be done? In other words, are you looking into completely removing the whole thing and building up to raise the floor to work it work? Are you with me, Chris?
Yeah, let me attempt. I think I understand what you're saying, but I'll give an answer. If it's not right, you can let me know. But what's there now is a resilient floor that is adhered to the subfloor, which is a concrete subfloor, and it's also on the second floor of the building. So what's underneath it is like it's I think it's locker rooms and stuff like that. So we're not removing the subfloor. It's going to go. You just strip off the resilient floor, clear all the adhesives or anything that holds it down, and then you have a smooth concrete surface that will then build up the wood floor on top of.
So do you think the concrete of the subfloor needs to be assessed right now to get a good handle on the cost estimate? Or I don't know, just ask.
I don't think so. I don't anticipate that there's issues. I don't think there's anything that leads us to believe that there are issues in that, but obviously, there may be things you can't see that we need to deal with, but we have contingencies built in for some of that. But again, if you had widespread problems,
What does it take to see the subfloor of the concrete? What does it take? Is it pretty easy now to see it? Like
we would have to do a destructive removal
Okay.
of a section or corner of it, and frankly, I'll be honest with you that you could do that in spots, but it's like soil. If you move 10 feet away, you can't see. So it's really we don't have anything telling us there's issues right now globally widespread. And when we remove the floor, we will definitely take a look and make sure it's good to receive a new floor on top of it.
any kind of GPR testing would tell you. I don't know, just asking to be on the safe side. The other question
Go ahead.
I guess from the mark layout that they wanted, do you have the layout of what they wanted? I got confused how the bleachers are going to work when you're going to have the 4 quadrangle, but just asking, just being the son of the basketball player too, how the bleachers are going to work. I wasn't quite sure.
So,
Yeah,
if
so-
Chris, you want to show the picture again and you can explain it, that'd be probably the best.
Okay. You get to
One game, there were a lot of people, no place to sit.
It's a frequent occurrence. There's no place to sit right now.
all right. So in this scheme, you can see the bleachers are stacked on the right and on the left over here. And so these are telescoping bleachers. So this I think the way it's going to end up with our analysis is that the bleacher section on the right will stay against the wall, and then the bleacher section on the left will be a traveling section. But we're going to analyze that. So just for the sake of this conversation, say the ones on the right stay and they telescope out, say to about this line here, and there's a certain number of spectators that can sit in there. The section on the left side. Go ahead, Mark.
So, Chris, sorry, I just want to jump in. So, just for frame of reference, those bleachers that are against on the right side, right? If you're looking at the screen on the right side, Chris, how many at a minimum would be able to sit on that side? If you had to guess.
I'm gonna say somewhere around 750.
Okay, so 750. So on one side of this new configuration, you'd already be able to sit 400 more people in the gym than we can sit right now for a basketball game. 400 more, just on one side. So now if
And
you
then
brought
the
the
same-
bleachers
yeah.
over, now you're talking about another 1,100 people.
Yeah. So I think what we're talking about is trying to get. I think the mark is between 12 to 1,500 people total at a minimum, and then if you can get more, that's icing on the cake. And so the section on the left would do the same thing, extend out until it gets to around in here. So that's the configuration for 2 games. But once it's extended, it can also further travel so that it meets up to a line that's here. And so you'd say have a bleacher section out here that then you have 2-sided court. So that's kind of
bleachers, yeah, on the main
two-sided
court.
bleachers on a main court. And that's the conceptual version for right now.
All right. Ethan, you all set with that? We'll move on to Mark.
I'm Chris, but which school may have this telescoping bleachers? Just curious. Chris, do you know which school has this kind of configuration? The bleachers can telescope to quite a distance.
What WPI has them in their gym.
Okay.
So a lot of colleges have them in their gym. If you see a lot of schools that have a balcony, and then there's bleachers that come out to the edge of the balcony, a lot of those facilities have those type of bleachers.
Okay.
They
so
sit
they'll
at the
work
first
right.
level and then they drive them over and pull them out on the second level as well.
Okay. All right. As long as you have
Yeah.
it, it'll work.
Yeah, a lot of
Good.
colleges and universities use them.
Okay.
Mark?
2 quick comments and a question. One is, Keith, to your question about the subfloor, one of the good things about using a wood floor, which I would definitely recommend, is that because it's a floating floor, it sits on furring strips that lift the floor above the substrate. So any kind of lack of levelness or bumpiness in the concrete doesn't just telegraph into the floor surface. So you can actually adjust the furring and the subfloor to get everything dead level, which is a huge benefit. The second comment is on the wood floor. I think all of us, and Mark, I'm sure you want this to be a problem that, a solution that lasts you for well beyond your career and into ideally, the next AD's career. And a great thing about the wood floor, as you mentioned, is roughly every 10 years, you have to sand it down and refinish it. But if you're using solid wood tongue and groove floors, you can easily get at least 3 full sandings and refinishes, and sometimes they'll say 4, 5, 6, or even more depending on how aggressively you do it. So that lets this one floor last for decades and decades and decades, even if it's getting renewed every 10 years or so, instead of stripping up the whole floor and replacing it like you would with a Resilient. So big fan of the wood floor My question is, I guess maybe this is for Jay or Chris or Frank or Mark, I'm not sure who, but what, what are the next steps here? And what is our role in the next steps?
That was actually just going to be my segue to next meeting dates and motion to adjourn. Unfortunately, we don't have $2.5 million, sitting in the remaining project funds, right? This work, remember the report from TAP-A came out in August. So that was after the school committee had already discussed and prioritized our capital projects for this past summer cycle that just went to town meeting. So the school committee and the select board are well aware of the need to do this work. Select board chair, Mr. Mucci, is actually watching tonight here as a member of the public, so I appreciate that. We wanted both the school committee and the board to be aware of this need that it's coming. A floor is a little bit like a roof, right? They don't last forever, and at some point they have to be replaced. So in terms of next steps, it's fair to say we're not sure how this is going to get funded. However, it's very much on the radar of both the board and town management. Last month, in the run-up to town meeting, Capital Planning Committee came to the select board and asked for a commitment towards developing a plan, not necessarily a detailed list of projects and an overall cost, but to come up with some sort of plan to fund many much needed capital projects throughout town, not just on schools, but even broadly on the town side. And I think Mr. Mucci and the board had some really good, robust discussion about that, and there was support towards coming up with a plan. Rich actually spoke about this briefly under Article 1 at town meeting about 3 weeks ago. So the board has asked management to help them start to come up with a list of projects. That list is substantially, like 95% really, all the capital projects that we talk about through the usual cycle. So like Ambrose roof, McCall Middle School roof, which is not in the wheelhouse of the EFPBC, but we certainly talked about that. The site work, flat work at Lincoln and so forth. So town manager is developing a list of projects. There are 2 projects on that list that that missed the press date for capital. This is one of them. And the other is the deterioration of the concrete at the high school, right, that we just talked about earlier tonight. So Beth is, helpfully carrying both of those on her list. She has some placeholders in there for cost. And I'm doing the best I can to answer your question, Mark. I think what will happen over the next very few weeks is the board and management are just going to continue to discuss that list. I think this presentation is helpful tonight because knowing that administration wants to go with the wood and the configuration that you saw, it tells us this is closer to a $2.5 million project than a $2.1 million project. 2.5, I think, is actually what the town manager is carrying right now for this as a placeholder. So we have to let those conversations kind of move forward. And I think at this point, we've sort of done what we were supposed to do, which is to discuss it and kind of push administration to make a recommendation in terms of configuration and flooring type. They've done so. And I know Gary Grassi is also watching tonight from the gallery, and he's very involved at Winchester Youth Basketball. So I wanted to put in this plug. The school committee will be kind of watching, we'll be discussing this. We're going to do a second act of this on December 12th. That's going to be in the evening, is it, Frank, at the high school? I think that's right. I don't know if we have a time yet, at least 6 or 7 o'clock, I assume. We have a school committee facilities meeting, facilities planning sort of strategy session. And our expectation is this will be on the agenda. So, I think if Mr. Mucci, Mr. Grassi, and other community members have kind of feedback for us, they could certainly reach out to you, Mark Aria, or Frank, and share what they think. And that's a public meeting. So if folks want to say something about the basketball recommendations, they could do so on the 12th. But the school committee really hasn't had the benefit yet of the presentation that you guys just saw tonight. So we'll do that in a couple of weeks, or a week and a day.
Thank you, Chris. All right, we already did any other questions for the floor before we move on? It's just really informational. So like Chris said, they're going to address it on the 12th.